Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about something so many of us can relate to, the math classroom. We're going to look at how we can transform it from a place where you just memorize formulas to a place where cool concepts like probability actually make sense and, well, stick. Let's get into it. I want you to think back for a second, back to your school days. Remember sitting in math class, watching the teacher scribble on the board and just thinking, when am I ever going to use this? Yeah, we've all been there. But what if the problem wasn't the math itself? What if it was how it was being taught? You know, this quote from an educator named Jessica Fauser just hits the nail on the head. In so many classrooms, learning becomes this cycle of just copying what the teacher does and then spinning it back out for homework. Students aren't really learning how to think for themselves or even how to use the textbook sitting right in front of them.
So here's our roadmap. First, we're going to dig into the problem. Then we'll explore 3 key ways to fix it: building a solid foundation, making learning playful, and making sure we're teaching every kind of learner. And finally, the big one, we'll look at the proof. Does all this actually work?
All right, let's start by really unpacking what's going wrong, because this isn't just about kids getting bored. It's about a bigger issue, a failure to build the skills they actually need, like resourcefulness and how to solve real problems.
Fauser noticed something that's kind of huge in her classroom. When students got stuck, what was their first move? It wasn't to look back at their notes or check the book. Nope. It was to immediately put their hand up and ask for help. And that creates this dependency, right? It stops them from becoming confident, independent problem solvers.
So, how do we start to fix this? Well, the first step is to actually teach students how to learn. We've got to give them the tools to organize information for themselves so they can go from being passive listeners to being active drivers of their own education. And the solution starts with something pretty simple, but honestly, it's brilliant: the math journal. Now, this is not just a regular notebook for scribbling down problems. It's a structured system that helps students really process and own new ideas, turning their notes into a personalized textbook they'll actually want to use. The real power of this journal is its structure. For every single new concept, let's say permutation or probability, students break it down into 5 simple parts. What's the definition? What's the equation? Can you draw a picture of it? Give me an example. And here's the most important one: what are its real-world uses? This simple framework forces them to engage with the material on a way deeper level. Okay, so once students have this framework for learning, we can start building on it. This is where we get to ditch the boring lectures and bring in hands-on activities that make these abstract ideas feel real. And dare I say it, actually fun? And this is where you can really see the transformation happen. So instead of a teacher lecturing at the board, picture students literally throwing a ball at a target to figure out probability. Instead of just copying down formulas, they're playing a game show to see how new information changes the odds. It's a total shift from being passive to being active. And the possibilities are just fantastic. You've got things like a target toss or a percentage race that turns a boring review sheet into a fun competition. There's even a project where students go research carnival games to figure out the actual odds of winning that giant stuffed animal. It's all about connecting math to things they can see, touch, and get excited about.
But, a great classroom isn't just about having cool activities. It's about making sure those activities work for everybody. And that brings us to something absolutely critical: differentiated instruction.
The main idea here is super simple, but so powerful. One size does not fit all. Truly effective teaching means you're always adapting, always modifying your lessons to meet the unique needs of every single student in that room, right where they are. So let's make this real. For a student with ADD, a long lecture can be a real struggle, right? So what's the adaptation? It's simple. You break up the lesson. You have them use physical objects or even act out a probability problem. It's a small change that makes the learning physical, turning a moment where they might zone out into a moment where they're totally engaged. It's the same idea for a student with a learning disability. A huge page of homework can feel impossible. The fix? A shorter assignment that still hits all the key ideas. Or maybe note-taking is tough for them. Okay, then you give them an outline beforehand. These little adjustments can make an absolutely massive difference. And this goes for your advanced learners too. For that gifted student who blows through the assignment in 10 minutes, you don't just give them more of the same boring problems. No way. You challenge them to think bigger. Ask them to figure out why the formulas work, or have them create their own tricky probability problems for the class. That's how you keep them hooked.
So we have all these amazing ideas, right? Structured journals, active games, teaching that's inclusive. It all sounds great. But here's the million-dollar question. Is there any actual proof that this stuff works? Let's check out the data. And the answer is a huge yes. A massive review by PBS looked at the impact of their educational resources, things like videos, games, and lesson plans that use all these active learning ideas. The result? It's pretty staggering. In 90% of the studies they looked at, these modern teaching tools had a significant positive impact on how much students learned. And we're not talking about a tiny little bump. When it came to actual scores, one study found that students who used these kinds of digital resources on a regular basis, they outperformed the national average by 10 percentage points. 10 points. That is a huge leap.
But it's not just about test scores, is it? It's also about the experience. Look at what the students themselves had to say. 54% said class was more interesting, 50% felt like they learned more, and almost half said the class was more challenging, in a good way. This approach doesn't just improve scores, it improves school itself. So the takeaway here is just crystal clear. When we finally move past the old school lecture and start using strategies that are active, engaging, and designed for every student, the results really do speak for themselves. You get better scores, and you get a better classroom. And that brings us to our final thought. The evidence is all there. The strategies are clear. We know how to build a math class where students don't just get by, but actually thrive. So the real question isn't whether it's possible. It's what's going to take to make this the new normal for every student,